Looking at our world from a theological perspective. This is the Theology Central Podcast, making theology central.
Good evening, everyone. It is Wednesday, May the 26th, 2021. It is currently 6:11 p.m. Central Time, and I am here inside the empty sanctuary of Victory Baptist Church tonight, where we will not be having an in-person service, which is a little frustrating and a little disappointing because we so desperately need to finish our work on typology, but we started that work on typology with people present, so I want to finish it with people present. So yeah, maybe we'll switch to, if everything works out Sunday, maybe we'll do typology Sunday night. I think that's what we'll do. But I want to finish that, and that will be for the VBC Bible Institute. And we also need to finish Genesis 15 for the VBC Bible Institute. And I also need to finish about 900 other things. But that's the way it works. I gave the illustration the other day that I feel like I'm swimming, and I've lost where the shore is. I can't find my way back, and I'm going to drown because I got too far away from the shore. Because whenever I start something, I'm like, okay, let's do this. Oh, then let's do this, and let's do this. And then next thing you know, I just feel like there's so many things, and I'm out in the deep water. I can't stand up, and I get pulled under because of all the things I'm trying to do. But I'm doing the best I can to stay above water. And what I'm going to try to do this evening is try to accomplish a number of things. Here's what we're going to try to accomplish this evening. It is Wednesday evening, so that means I need to hand to my people at Victory Baptist Church. I want to hand them a Bible study exercise. For those who do not know how the Bible study exercises work, they're very simple, very straightforward. I do part of the teaching, and then I try to leave something for you to work, which then is supposed to spark a conversation where then you email me or members of the church, hop into the chat for the church and say, hey, okay, I did this. I looked at this. What about this? What about that? And then I respond to them. And then sometimes that means then I come back out here, turn on the microphone to do a part 2, a part 3, a part 4, a part 5, until we've really taken that Bible study, that original Bible study exercise, and got as much from it as I think we could possibly get from it and until we have to move on. So that's the way these are supposed to work. I do part of the work. Another thing about the Bible study exercises, remember, it's not designed for me to sit there and just like give you a well-rehearsed study. It's me trying to take you through the study in real time. It's supposed to be very real, very just right there where I do part of it. I ask questions. And yeah, it's not for you to sit there and just be a passive listener, but be an active participant. So I invite you to participate, whether you're a member of the church or not a member of the church. You can, for the members of the church, you can obviously communicate with me in the chat. Non-members of the church, you can email me anytime, newsif@yahoo.com, newsif@yahoo.com. And for everyone, church member or not church member, you can always chat with me live when I'm on the air like I am right now by using the Spreaker app and hitting the little chat icon. So that's one of the things we're doing a Bible study exercise tonight. It's one of the things I'm hoping to accomplish tonight is to do a Bible study exercise primarily for the members of Victory Baptist Church, but for anyone and everyone, inviting you to be a part of the Bible study. All right, so that's one of the things I want to accomplish. A second thing I want to accomplish tonight is to kind of return back to a subject that I kind of just did an impromptu throw it out there. It wasn't really well done, but I just kind of threw it out there. But trying to get people to think about the classification of Psalms. What do I mean by that? Well, if you look in any Bible handbook or you look in anything dealing with the book of Psalms, they will classify the Psalms into different types. And there are a group of Psalms that are sometimes labeled or classified as messianic Psalms. That these are Psalms that supposedly prophesy and point us to Jesus Christ. And I have been challenging this idea that basically every verse in every chapter points to Jesus. And if you can go back and listen to my study of the Niagara Creed, where we get into some really deep hermeneutical concepts to hear my challenge of that. So when I hear that, oh, that's a messianic psalm, I want to challenge that and go, what makes it a messianic psalm? What is your criteria for labeling it a messianic psalm? Just because someone placed it in a list in a book doesn't mean that it is. What are you basing that? How are you judging that list? So we brought up some of that, challenged some of that. It wasn't a great discussion, but it was at least an introduction. Then The Gospel in the Psalms is a book written by Henry Law. And guess what? I made that book available free for everyone. Go to theologycentral.net, theologycentral.net. Go to the blog section. It's right there. You can download it in PDF file. And the reason I gave that is because Henry Law was famous for doing a number of books was like Gospel and the Pentateuch, Gospel and different books. And he relied heavily on typology to say, hey, there you see the gospel, there you see Jesus. And he relied a lot on typology, which we've been talking about in the VBC Bible Institute and our mini-series dealing with typology. So I gave that there, and we looked at the first chapter. It's the Gospel in Psalms. We look at how he handled Psalm 1, and he didn't really do much typology. In fact, in my estimation, he really missed how to interpret Psalm chapter 1. In my estimation, I think he really missed it. But because that's out there, I wanted to, once again, turn back to the Psalms for a lot of those reasons. So I need to do a Bible study exercise, so I'm going to choose a Psalm. Because we were dealing with, is a psalm a messianic psalm or not a messianic psalm? I'm going to choose a psalm that some people say is messianic, and some people argue, no, it's about David or it's Hezekiah. It's about someone else. So I want to choose it for that. And because we've got the Henry Law book for free available on the theologycentral.net pod page. Go theologycentral.net, go to the blog section. Well, you can open that up and see what he has to say in regards to Psalm 2, which will only add to this whole Bible study exercise. So there's a lot of things I'm trying to bring together for this Bible study exercise. So yes, I'm trying to do probably more than I'm capable of doing, but I'm going to try to do it anyway. So if you have a Bible, this would be a great time to open it if you can. I know sometimes people are listening while they're driving or doing other things, but if you can, Psalm chapter 2. That's the psalm we're going to look at. Psalm chapter 2. We are going to do a lot of work on this. I'm going to try to do some of it without doing all of it. Okay, I'm going to try. All right, Psalm chapter 2. It is 12 verses long. 12 verses long, so let's just read all 12. Are you ready? Psalm chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. Why do the heathen rage and the people imagine a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us break their bands asunder and cast away their cords from us. He that sitteth in the heavens shall laugh. The Lord shall have them in derision. Then shall he speak unto them in his wrath, and vex them in his sore displeasure. Yet have I set my king upon my holy hill of Zion. I will declare the decree. The Lord hath said unto me, thou art my son, this day have I begotten thee. Ask of me, and I shall give thee the heathen for thine inheritance, and the uttermost parts of the earth for thy possession. Thou shalt break them with a rod of iron. Thou shalt dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. Be wise now, therefore, O ye kings. Be instructed, ye judges of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son, S-O-N, lest he be angry and you perish from the way when his wrath is kindled but a little. Blessed are all they that put their trust in him. Now, I cannot speak for all of you. I will only speak for myself here. For most of my Christian life, I have read this psalm without any regards to what could be the historical setting, what could be the historical situation. I always just immediately apply this well, basically to the world I'm living, that the heathen are raging and the people are imagining the vain thing. The kings of the earth set themselves against God, and they take counsel together and against the Lord's anointed, and they want to break away. They want to break off his restraints. They want to break off his bands. They want to break off his chains. They want to cast away his cords from us. They want to break away from all of God's restraints. And that's the world in which we live today. And how does God respond to the world today and doing that? Well, he does so he sits in the heaven and he laughs at all of them. And what is he ultimately going to do? He's going to break them and destroy them and judge them. I kind of apply it to the world today. This is how I've always applied it. What does it say about the world today? What does it may say about the world in the future? And what does it say that God will ultimately do? I don't usually look at Psalm chapter 2 about what it says in regards to any particular time in history. I kind of just rip it out of that context. Maybe at times I've tried to put it in its historical setting, but I think typically when I read it, even reading it for a devotional time, I tend to just go, well, that describes the world today. That's going to describe the world in the future. And I have probably always looked at it more from a messianic perspective, that this is talking about Jesus, and that there's references to Jesus coming into the future, maybe the millennial reign. I mean, there's a lot of different ways I probably have looked at different aspects of it. You can tell me how you've looked at it in the past, but you know what we do? However we've looked at it in the past is irrelevant when we study the Bible in the present. Past understanding usually becomes nothing more than present deception. You have to throw out your past studies whenever you study the Bible in the present, because you studied the Bible in the past as a fallible individual. Therefore, your conclusions could have been wrong. So relying on those past conclusions in the present only sets you up for present deception and present error. Throw out the past understanding. Look at the text again. So we're going to look at Psalm chapter 2, but before we do so, I just want to show you how there's some disagreements on how to handle this. This comes from Christianity.com, right? I don't even know when this was published. I think they took it from an article published. Let me see here if they give the source. Okay, they took this article. They took it basically from a book called God's Thought of the King by G. Campbell Morgan. And I can't remember what years G. Campbell Morgan lived. So they took something from God's Thought of the King by G. Campbell Morgan, then they adapted it and then created this article and then posted it on Christianity.com. But they give G. Campbell Morgan as the credit for being the author because they took it from his book. All right. So here's the question that they ask for the title of this article. Are you ready? Is Psalm chapter 2 really about Jesus? Now, I see they're doing what I have tried to do by asking questions about how, when you see a psalm and it says it's a messianic psalm. See, the problem with getting that list is then you go read the psalm and that presupposition, you are going to read it as a messianic psalm because someone told you it's a messianic psalm. Listen, if someone tells you a psalm is messianic, don't go interpret it as messianic. Throw out that presupposition, go study the psalm and see if it leads you to a messianic conclusion, if you conclude that it's messianic. But don't go into it just because some book, some list told you it's messianic. Typically what preachers do, they'll say, tonight we're going to be studying Psalm chapter 2. Psalm chapter 2 is a messianic psalm. It points to Jesus Christ. Therefore, they've already given you the presupposition. Then they just go and prove. They don't even really prove it. They just go and preach it as if the presupposition has already been proven. And people in the pew always fall for that. When the preacher says, this chapter is about this, and then they preach it as if it's about that is flawed. They have to first prove that's what the chapter is actually about. They have to first prove that's the way it should be interpreted, not just tell you it is. But many people fall for that time and time again. So we're going to look at this article and see. So the first thing we're going to try to do is Psalm chapter 2 tonight. The first thing we're going to try to do is we're going to ask ourselves, is this a messianic psalm? Is it really about Jesus? All right, that's the first thing. Then we're going to do we've got a couple of things we're going to do. Are you ready? All right, here we go. I wish people were present in the church tonight because this would be far more fun with people present. Probably lead into some disagreements and arguing, but it would be more fun. All right, here we go. All right, if you're listening to me live, feel free to jump in and tell me how wrong you are. All right, here we go. I'm joking. All right, here we go. Is Psalm 2 really about Jesus? All Old Testament hopes centered on the coming of one whom the prophets, psalmists, and seers alike spoke as Messiah, the servant of God, the messenger of God. These aspirations of the past are explicit in Psalm 2 and implicit in all prophetic writings. In that psalm emerge into clear and definitive or definite statements that the underlying hope and aspiration of all the singers and seers of Israel. All right, so they say in Psalm 2, there's an implicit and implicit in all the prophetic writings, okay, are these aspirations about the one that is to come, the Messiah, the servant of God. And they say that in that psalm, I'm assuming they're referring to Psalm 2, in that psalm emerge into clear and definite statement the underlying hope and aspiration of all the singers and seers of Israel. So they're saying, so what he is saying is that all of the Old Testament, you find these aspirations and these hopes of basically the coming Messiah. And that in Psalm 2, there's a definite statement underlying that hope that everyone had in all the Old Testament prophets, that it's in Psalm 2. Now, they go on to say, there are different opinions about the psalm. It is said that the reference is to David as the anointed king of Israel. So there's some saying, no, this is referring to David. David is the anointed king of Israel. That's what it's referring to. They go on to say, it is suggested, so there's one option. So some say that it's a reference to David. Number two, some say it is a reference to Hezekiah. Now, while there may be elements of truth in these contentions, it is impossible to read the psalm and imagine that all its values were fulfilled in the case of David or Hezekiah. If the psalm is of David, it is of David as God's messenger, his Messiah, but only in a limited sense. If the psalm concerns Hezekiah, it concerns Hezekiah as God's messenger, God's servant, God's Messiah, but only in a limited sense. So they say, some say it's about David, some say it's about Hezekiah, but they argue that they wouldn't completely fulfill what is being put in Psalm 2. Now, you could ask, well, wait a minute. How do we understand Psalm 2? Isn't it poetry? Isn't it a song? Does it kind of use poetic language? So does it have to be, is it giving us a clear prophecy that everything has to be fulfilled in detail? Or is it simply a poetic language about this anointed king and what they did and not do and all those things? How do we interpret the psalm? There's a lot of questions there. So option 1, David. Option 2, Hezekiah. Option 3 would be, well, it could refer to David. It could refer to Hezekiah. But we're not going to really focus on the historical. Ultimately, it's fulfilled in Christ. So we're going to look at it more as a prophetic psalm than as a psalm dealing with anything related in history. That's usually how the third option works. Now, the third option say, well, no, we got to figure out the historical, but almost all the focus goes on the prophetical. All right? Now, let's see what else they have to say here. He says, but there are values beyond these. In the case of either of these men, there were local, immediate, incidental applications of value, but shining through are larger meaning than the men understood who wrote the psalm, and fuller harmonies than the singers detected who sang the songs. So they're like, okay, there could be some historical thing going on, but there was something going on far beyond what they understood, far beyond those who read it, wrote it, far beyond those who sung it. There's something far more going on. They didn't get it at the time, but now that we have the New Testament, we can go back and we can see the fulfillment. We can understand it. Okay, that's the claim. Remember, these are the claims that they are making. They say this psalm, Psalm 2, has its fulfillment in Christ and in him alone. All right? So they say that it's fulfilled in Christ and him alone. Now, there's a lot more they have to say here, but not a lot more. It's just a few more things, but I'm not going to read those because I don't want to give any more presupposition than I've already given you by just even considering this. So 3 options. Psalm 2, it's about David, it's about Hezekiah, or it could be about them in some limited sense, but ultimately it points to Christ. So we need to look at it more from a prophetic perspective and looking at how it's ultimately fulfilled in Christ. I mean, in fact, that article goes on to say it's ultimately fulfilled in Christ. Now, what do you think? Which way do you tend to lean? Now, you probably already have your answer, but remember, whatever answer you think you have, throw it out, because now we have to actually do some work on the psalm. Now, what should we do? What is the first thing we should do? Now, I'm asking this like there's people present in the building. There's no one in the building. So, I could ask, hey, anyone in the building? No, there's no one here. Okay, hey, what do you think we should do? Okay, nobody here answers. Now, I know what you're thinking. Sometimes, even when there's people here, that's about the sound that I get when I ask a question, right? Sometimes this is what happens. There'll be people sitting in the pew, and I'll be like, okay, so we have Psalm 2. We got differences of opinions on what this psalm is about and how it should be interpreted. So what is the first thing we should do? And then I would hear this. Yeah, that's called silence, okay? And that's always frustrating because I'm like, no, answer the question, okay? But I'm sure that there's people everywhere tonight answering the question. What should we do? Well, the first thing we have to do is we have to do observation. And how do we do our observation? The best way to do observation is with a piece of paper, a pencil, and doing an outline. We need to outline Psalm chapter 2, all right? We're going to outline Psalm chapter 2. Now, I'm going to try to be very careful here, but I'm just going to read it and offer. I'm not going to try to give you the outline, but I'm going to try to give you some sections to consider here. All right? Look at verse 1 through 3. Why do the heathen rage and the people imagine a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord, against his anointed, saying, let us break their bands asunder and cast away their cords from us. Didn't look at verse 4. He that sitteth in the heavens shall laugh. The Lord shall have them in derision. Now stop right there. Clearly, in my reading, I would argue that clearly there is a change that occurs between verse 3 and verse 4. Verse 1, 2, and 3, you have the heathen, you have the people, you have the kings of the earth, right? You have the heathen, the people, and the kings of the earth all mentioned, what they're doing, what they're saying, and then dramatically in verse 4, there's a major change. He that sitteth in the heavens. He that sitteth in the heavens. So we go from the people to God. I think that you can see that. So I will just offer, I've told you I'm not going to give, I'm going to try to be very careful here. Verses 1 through 3. What would we call verses 1 through 3? What do we have in verses 1 through 3? You could call this maybe, and again, I'm trying to teach this in a way like I don't know the answer. I have to try to teach it like I don't know because I'm trying to get you involved in the process. All right, so here we go. Could we not call Psalm chapter 2, verses 1 through 3, number 1 in our outline, could we call this the attitudes of those on earth? Could we refer to this as the attitudes of humans? Because we have clearly the attitude. Look at the attitudes that we have here. Just look at this. First, look at the groups that are mentioned, right? So we have the attitudes of those on earth, I think. Look at the groups that are mentioned. We have heathen, we have people, we have kings of the earth, and we have rulers. I think we have 4 groups of individuals. Agreed? And then we have attitudes listed. Look at the attitudes. Why do the heathen rage? Why do the people imagine a vain thing? Vain imagination. The kings of the earth set themselves and the rulers take counsel together. They take counsel together. against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us break their bands asunder. Let's cast away their cords from us. We have an attitude of rebellion. We have an attitude of rage. We have I think those are the two major attitudes we have. An attitude of rage. Well, no, three. An attitude of rage, vain imaginations, and rebellion. We have the people, and we have the attitudes. So I would call verses 1 through 3 the attitudes of those on earth, or the attitudes of humans, and I would identify who the humans are, and I would identify the attitudes. Now, clearly, I think any reasonable person would have to guess that if this was written at this time, it had, first and foremost, there's got to be some historical context to what's going on here. There has to be. There has to be. But okay, I think that's a good way to outline it. I think verses 1 through 3 would be point 1 in our outline. Now, look what happens. Verses 4 through 9. He that sitteth in the heavens shall laugh. The Lord shall have them in derision. Then shall he speak unto them in his wrath, and vex them in his sore displeasure. Yet have I set my king upon my holy hill of Zion. I will declare the decree. The Lord hath said unto me, thou art my son. This day have I begotten thee. Ask of me, and I shall give thee the heathen for thine inheritance, and the uttermost parts of the earth for thy possession. Thou shalt break them with a rod of iron. Thou shalt dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. So clearly, chapter 2, verses 1 through 3 is the people's attitudes, right? The people's attitudes, the people's actions, whatever, however you want to label them. And then verses 4 through 9. Now, I made a mistake in my notebook. I said the reaction of God, verses 4 through 9. Now, the reason that's somewhat of a mistake is I think that's more interpretive than it is observational. Because I think what I can say is this is the reaction of him who sitteth in the heavens. Well, yeah, okay. I keep reading it. There's a lot of questions I have here. I would say this is the reaction. I would say verses 4 through 9 is the reaction of the one who sitteth in heaven. All right? And then you could go through his reactions. Clearly, Psalm chapter 2, verse 4, he's sitting in heaven. He laughs. He's going to have him derision. He has wrath. He's going to vex them in his sore displeasure. He has set his king upon the holy hill of Zion. He's going to declare the decree of the Lord. I will declare the decree of the Lord hath said unto me. Wait, what happens is verse 7? Oh. I will declare. Okay, I've got some questions here, but I'm not going to try to give it away. I'm just going to give us you can work through this yourself. So I'm going to give you a preliminary outline, but I want you to work on it. So Psalm chapter 2, verses 1 through 3, we get the attitudes of the inhabitants of the earth, the attitude of human beings, and we can break down who the people are and what are their attitudes. Then we have, I'm going to call this the reaction, because clearly it's a reaction to the people on earth, the reaction of him who sitteth in heaven. And I'm going to put 4 through 9. I'm looking there to see if there's kind of a transition maybe on who's speaking. I think there's who's speaking there? I think there's some interesting things going on in verses 4 through 9, but we won't get into that right now. All right? Then verses 10 through 12. Be wise now, therefore, O ye kings. Be instructed, ye judges of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry and you perish from the way when his wrath is kindled but a little. I'm going to call verses 10 through 12, I'm just going to say instructions. Now, we have to figure out exactly who the instructions are coming from, but we're going to call this instructions, verses 10 through 12. Right? 10 through 12. And then, so number one, the attitudes of the inhabitants of the earth, the attitudes of those on earth, verses 1 through 3. The reaction of him who sitteth in heaven, verses 4 through 9. And then verses 10 through 12, the instructions. And then number 4, the promise. And the promise is at the end of verse 12, blessed are all they that put their trust in him. There is a promise. So we have the attitudes of those on earth. That's number 1 in our outline, verses 1 through 3. We have the reaction of him who sitteth in heaven, verses 4 through 9. Now, just please note, verses 4 through 9, you have some interesting things going on there. Pay close attention to who is speaking. Who is speaking to whom? Who is speaking to whom? Try to figure that out. All right. Number 3, the instructions, verses 10 through 12. And then number 4, the promise, verse 12. There is your outline. There is your outline of Psalm chapter 2. All right? So, first thing you need to do is we need to do that outline. You can work that. You can manipulate that, change it, make it better. Please let me see your outline. You can email it to me at newsif@yahoo.com. There's the first thing we need to do is an outline. Second thing we need to do. I'm going to do this a little bit. So there's number 1. So make sure you create your own outline. Number 2, second thing, find every reference to Psalm chapter 2 in the New Testament. Find any reference in the New Testament to Psalm chapter 2 and make sure, is it a direct quote? Is it an allusion? Who's saying it? How is it being said? How is it being used? Figure it. Don't just try to do cross-references and just list verses. Try to go, it's Psalm chapter 2, this verse is quoted right here. We think they're pulling from Psalm 2 because they use the same language. However, it doesn't say it is written, so in other words, it doesn't make any allusion that it's coming from Psalm 2, but we think that it is, or no, it's clearly a direct quote from Psalm chapter 2. Find all of the references in the New Testament to Psalm chapter 2 and try to determine how are they being used? A direct quote, an allusion. What are they doing with Psalm chapter 2? Are they applying it to Christ? Number 1, outline it. Number 2, find every reference in the New Testament that quotes Psalm chapter 2. All right? You got that? Then, number 3. I want you to work from verses 4 through 12. Verses 4 through 12. Okay? And I want you to go through each verse. All right? He that sitteth in the heavens shall laugh. The Lord shall have them in derision. Then shall he speak unto them in his wrath and vex them in his sore displeasure. All right, go through verses 4 through 12 and determine who is speaking and to whom are they speaking. Now, clearly, we have the Lord will have them in derision. He shall speak unto them in his wrath and vex them in his sore displeasure. Okay, is that the Lord like God, or is that the Lord the King? Is the King being referred to as Lord here? All right, it's capital L-O-R-D. It's not capital L-O-R-D in the King James. So what could Lord there refer to an earthly authority? Is that, and sitteth in the heavens, is that someone sitting in the actual heavens, or is there other ways of looking at that? All right, but just figure out who's talking and to whom are they speaking. And the reason I'm bringing this up is, look at this. All right, so the Lord shall have them in derision. He shall speak unto them in his wrath and vex them in his sore displeasure. Yet have I set my king upon my holy hill of Zion. Well, wait, so who's speaking in 6? Who has set his king upon my holy hill? Is that God setting his king? Who's the king that he set on his holy hill? Is it David? So who is speaking and who are they speaking about? I will declare the decree. The Lord, all capital, L-O-R-D, hath said unto me. All right, so God is speaking. Who's the me? Who did God speak to there? All right, then in verse 10, be wise now, therefore, O ye kings. Who's speaking? Who's telling the kings to be wise? Right? So figure out who is speaking and to whom are they speaking. Work on that from verse 4 through 12. All right? Verses 4 through 12. I know it's going to take a little bit of time, but do that work. All right? Do that work. So number 1, outline it. Number 2, find every New Testament reference to Psalm chapter 2. Try to figure out what it's saying, how it's using it. Is it a direct reference, an allusion? Figure that. Number 3, go from verses 4, Psalm chapter 2, verses 4 through 12, and try to figure out who is speaking and to whom are they speaking. And try to justify your answer. And then last, verse 12. Last thing I want you to do. Who is the Son? Who is the Son? S-O-N. Who is the Son there? And justify your answer. Justify your answer. Prove your answer. So number 1, outline. Okay. Number 2, all New Testament references to Psalm chapter 2. Number 3, verses 4 through 12, just go through it. Who is speaking to whom? And look up verses 4 through 12 and multiple translations and see if they follow the same, based off the pronouns they're using. Does some translations seem to clarify it? Who is speaking to whom? And look up multiple translations on verse 12. Do all of them use the term son there with a capital S? Capital S-O-N, or just capital S, small o, and small n. There is your Bible study exercise. There you have it. Let me go through it again. Outline the chapter. Remember, no interpretation. Outlines that contain interpretation are bad. And part of my outline that I have written in my notebook here, because I did this for a devotional last night, or I started doing some work on it, wasn't a great devotional study. It was very, very, just preliminary thoughts. In my outline, I ended up offering an interpretation, and that's why I had to change my outline when I was kind of working it through it with you. So make sure no interpretation, just observation. So outline the chapter. Number 2, every New Testament reference to Psalm chapter 2. Number 3, go through verses 4 through 12. Identify who is speaking and to whom are they speaking. Right? And then verse 12, identify the Son. Identify the S-O-N there. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry. Who's the Son? Who's the Son? Is that if that's David, then if David is the one kind of because first you've got to figure out who's telling who to kiss the Son. Okay, once you figure that out, if that's David, then is that referring to Solomon? If that's Hezekiah, like what? Figure that out. All right. Now, by the time you're done with that, you're going to get a good idea possibly of, I think this is a strong candidate for being a messianic psalm, or wait a minute, maybe it's not such a strong candidate. And then you figure that out. There's more I would like you to do on the psalm, but that's going to keep you busy enough. We need to work on some application on it, but that will give you plenty to do. All right? You have that? Okay. There you go. Let me know what you find. Let me know what you discover. newsif@yahoo.com. newsif@yahoo.com. I'll be very interested to see what you start unpacking and you discover. And trust me, we're going to be doing a lot. We're going to be returning to Psalm chapter 2. We're going to pick some random sermons and see how other pastors handle it. And then we'll see what we can come up with. So we'll have some fun with Psalm chapter 2. And it brings a lot of concepts together. Remember, some say every chapter is about Jesus. It's going to bring up that concept. Some will refer to this as a messianic psalm. It's going to bring up that whole concept. A lot of issues going on here, and it'll be interested to see what you find and discover. All right, I'll stop right there. Everyone have a great night. God bless.